When my son stood in front of our entire family reunion and announced that I was a racist who had been feeding him lies his whole life, I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. 73 people went silent. My grandbabies stared at me with confusion in their eyes, and my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, stood beside him with her arms crossed and the smallest smile playing at the corners of her mouth. I'm me, and this is the story of how a history podcast nearly destroyed my family, and how the truth I discovered changed everything. Let me take you back to where this all started, because to understand what happened, you need to know who we were before everything fell apart. My name is Mee Johnson, and I'm 72 years old. I raised 3 children mostly on my own after my husband, Robert, passed from a heart attack when he was just 51. My oldest, Marcus, is 48 now. He's always been my sensitive child, the one who thought deeply about things, who asked questions about why the world works the way it does. I was so proud when he became a high school history teacher. Mom, he used to tell me, I'm doing what you taught me, helping young people understand where we came from so they know where they're going. Marcus married Vanessa 8 years ago. She was his second wife, a 40-year-old corporate consultant with strong opinions and an even stronger personality. I'll be honest with you, Vanessa and I never quite clicked the way I'd hoped. But I loved her because my son loved her, and I tried my best to welcome her into our family. I babysat their twin daughters, Lily and Rose, every Thursday while Vanessa worked late. I cooked Sunday dinners. I showed up for every school concert and every birthday party. Looking back now, I should have noticed the small changes that started about 6 months before everything exploded. It began innocently enough. Marcus mentioned at Sunday dinner that Vanessa had started listening to a podcast called Black and White History, The Truth They Never Taught You. It's really eye-opening, Mom, he said, passing me the collard greens. Did you know that a lot of what we learned in school was whitewashed or just flat out wrong? I nodded, spooning greens onto my plate. Of course, baby. History is always more complicated than what fits in a textbook. That's why I made sure you kids read beyond your assignments, remember. We talked about Tulsa, about Rosewood. About things your teachers skipped right over. Vanessa spoke up then, her voice carrying that edge of correction I was starting to recognize. But me, this goes deeper than just filling in gaps. This is about recognizing that almost everything we were taught was a deliberate lie designed to uphold white supremacy. I paused, my fork halfway to my mouth. Well, some of it certainly was biased, no question, but not some of it, all of it. Vanessa leaned forward, her eyes intense. That's what the podcast explains. Every narrative, every hero, every so-called fact we learned was constructed to maintain a racist system. I chose my words carefully. I hear what you're saying, sweetheart, and yes, we need to question what we were taught. But we also have to be careful not to swing so far the other way that we lose sight of truth altogether. History is about evidence, documents, multiple sources. Marcus interrupted, something he rarely did to me. Mom, have you even listened to the podcast? You're dismissing it without knowing what it actually says. That stung. My own son, suggesting I was closed-minded, you're right. I said quietly, I haven't listened to it. Maybe I should. The conversation moved on, but something had shifted. I felt it in my chest, a small flutter of worry that I couldn't quite name. Over the next few weeks, I noticed Marcus changing. He became quieter during our Sunday dinners, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When I told stories about my own childhood in Alabama, about my grandmother who worked as a seamstress, about the teachers who encouraged me despite segregation, Marcus would glance at Vanessa, and she would give him these subtle nods. One Thursday, while I was braiding little Rose's hair, she said something that made my hands go still. Grandma, Mommy says you don't know the real truth about history because of your generation. I looked at this 7-year-old child, her face so innocent and confused. What do you mean, baby? Mommy says people your age were taught lies, and now you believe them so much you can't see the truth even when it's right in front of you. My heart squeezed. I kept braiding, keeping my voice light. Well, Grandma's always learning new things. That's what smart people do. They keep their minds open, but Rose wasn't done. Mommy says that's the problem. You think your mind is open, but it's actually closed because of all the lies that got put in there when you were little. I finished the braid in silence, tied it off with a purple ribbon, and kissed the top of her head. All done, sweet girl. Go show your sister how pretty you look. As Rose skipped away, I sat there in my living room, the same living room where I'd raised 3 children, where I'd hosted book club meetings discussing James Baldwin and Toni Morrison, where I'd watched the election of the first black president with tears streaming down my face, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt dismissed, erased, as if my 72 years of living and learning meant nothing. That evening, I did what I should have done weeks earlier. I downloaded the podcast Marcus and Vanessa were so devoted to, Black and White History, The Truth They Never Taught You, hosted by someone named Dr. Travis Mitchell. The description promised to dismantle the lies of traditional history and reveal the uncomfortable truths that the establishment doesn't want you to know. I listened to 3 episodes that night, my tea growing cold beside me as the host's confident voice filled my living room. The podcast wasn't entirely wrong. That was the tricky part. Dr. Mitchell did cover real historical events that had been overlooked or minimized: the convict leasing system, medical experimentation on enslaved people, the destruction of prosperous black communities. These were things I already knew about, had read about, had discussed in my book club for years. But then came the parts that made me sit up straighter, that sent little alarm bells ringing in my head. According to Dr. Mitchell, every single founding document of America was created with the sole purpose of maintaining white supremacy. Every amendment, every law, every institution, all of it without exception, was designed to oppress. There was no nuance, no acknowledgement of progress or complexity, no recognition of the thousands of people across races who had fought for justice. It was all painted with the same brush, evil by design, irredeemable, unsalvageable. He claimed that reading traditional history books, even those written by respected black scholars, was a form of mental colonization. He said that anyone who believed in working within the system for change was either naive or complicit. He insisted that intergenerational dialogue was pointless because older generations were too contaminated by propaganda to recognize truth. And here's what troubled me most. He provided no sources, no footnotes, no citations, no references to check. Just his word, delivered with absolute certainty and rhetorical flair. When listeners wrote in asking for documentation, he'd respond that demanding sources is a tool of white supremacist academic gatekeeping. I sat there in my living room until 2 a.m, my mind spinning. I understood why it resonated with people, especially young people, who were hungry for truth and angry about injustice. The passion was real, the anger was justified, but passion and anger without accuracy, without intellectual rigor, without honest engagement with complexity, that worried me deeply. I decided to talk to Marcus, mother to son, not confrontationally, just honestly. That conversation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus had asked if he could stop by, said he wanted to talk to me about something important. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I was being paranoid. This was my son, my boy who used to curl up in my lap and ask me to read to him for hours. He arrived at 3:47. I remembered checking the clock when I heard his car in the driveway. He came in, gave me a brief hug that felt stiff, and sat down on the sofa with his hands clasped between his knees. "Mom, we need to talk about some things." I sat down across from him in my armchair. "I know, baby. I've been wanting to talk to you too. I listened to that podcast you mentioned." "Good." He cut me off, and there was something in his voice I didn't recognize, a hardness. Then you understand why Vanessa and I have been concerned. Concerned about what? About the influence you have on our daughters, about the narrative you've been feeding them. I felt my hands go cold. Marcus, what are you talking about? What narrative? He pulled out his phone, and I saw that he had notes prepared. Notes about me, his mother. Mom, do you remember when Lily asked you about Martin Luther King Jr. last month, and you told her he was a hero who changed America? Of course I remember. He was a hero. He did change America. But you didn't tell her the full truth. You didn't tell her that the same system that killed him is still in place. You didn't tell her that everything he died for has been undermined and erased. You gave her a feel-good story instead of the truth. My heart was pounding. Marcus, she's 7 years old. I gave her an age-appropriate answer that honored Dr. King's legacy while also being truthful. We can add complexity as she gets older. That's exactly the problem. His voice rose and I physically drew back. That's the incremental approach that keeps people compliant. You teach them the sanitized version first, and by the time they're old enough for the complexity, they're already indoctrinated into a false narrative. I stared at my son, this man I'd raised, and I barely recognized him. Baby, who's been telling you this? It's not about who's telling me anything. It's about me finally waking up to things I should have seen all along. The podcast just helped me articulate what I was already feeling. And what exactly were you feeling? He looked at me, and his eyes were so cold. That you raised us to be accommodating, to be respectful of a system that's fundamentally broken, to believe in gradual change and working within structures that were designed to destroy us. You taught us to read books by the oppressors and call it education. My breath caught. Marcus, I taught you to read everything. Baldwin, Morrison, Douglas, yes, but also to understand the whole scope of history, to think critically. Critical thinking within a white supremacist framework is still white supremacy, Mom. The words hit me like a slap. I sat there speechless as my son, my beautiful, thoughtful son, parroted phrases that sounded nothing like him. Marcus, I said slowly, carefully, I need you to hear me. I love you. I respect that you're on your own journey of learning and questioning, but what you're describing isn't education. It's ideology. And ideology that doesn't allow for questions, for nuance, for evidence-based discussion. Baby, that's not liberation. That's just a different kind of prison. He stood up, his face flushed. I knew you wouldn't understand. Vanessa said you wouldn't. Vanessa said. I stood too, my own anger finally sparking to life. Marcus, you're a grown man. You're a trained educator. You have a master's degree in history. When did you stop trusting your own mind and start letting a podcast and your wife do your thinking for you? The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. But it was too late. That's it exactly. He said quietly, dangerously, you can't even hear criticism without attacking. You can't consider that maybe, just maybe, your generation got it wrong. You're so invested in believing you were righteous that you fought the good fight that your way was the right way. You can't handle the idea that you were just playing into the same system you thought you were resisting. That's not fair, Marcus. That's not. Vanessa and I have made a decision. His voice was flat now, emotionless. We're limiting the girls' time with you until you're willing to do some serious self-examination. They're at a critical age and we need to protect them from harmful narratives. The room spun. Harmful narratives? I'm their grandmother. I love those girls more than my own life. Love isn't enough when it comes wrapped in poison. He walked toward the door. I followed him, my hands shaking. Marcus, please, let's sit down and talk about this rationally. Let's look at sources together, examine evidence together. Let's have an actual conversation instead of you just pronouncing judge. And walking away, he turned at the door, and for just a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across his face. Then it hardened again. I'll be in touch when you're ready to listen, Mom. Really listen. And he was gone. I stood in my doorway, watching his car pull away, and I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribcage and was pulling them tighter and tighter. This wasn't just a disagreement. This wasn't just a difference of opinion. My son had just told me I was a harmful influence on my own granddaughters. The children I'd cared for, loved, nurtured. I was being erased from their lives because of a podcast. I walked back inside and sat down in my armchair. The house was so quiet, too quiet. And for the first time in decades, since Robert died and left me to raise 3 children alone, I felt truly, desperately alone. The next 3 weeks were agony. Marcus didn't return my calls. When I texted, his responses were brief and cold. Still waiting for you to do the work, Mom. Not ready to engage until you're willing to be honest with yourself. The girls are asking about you, but we've explained that Grandma needs some time to learn and grow. Every message was a knife to my heart. I tried reaching out to Vanessa, thinking maybe woman to woman, mother, in-law to daughter, in-law, we could find some common ground. I sent her a long, heartfelt text explaining that I wasn't dismissing anyone's experience, that I was committed to always learning, but that I needed them to understand that my life experience also held value, that dismissing everything I'd learned and lived through wasn't fair or productive. Her response came 3 hours later. Me, this isn't about fairness. This is about truth. When you're ready to stop centering yourself and start listening to what Marcus needs, we can talk. Until then, I think space is best. I showed the texts to my daughter, Teresa. She read them with growing anger, her face getting redder with each swipe of the screen. Mama, this is manipulation, she said, handing my phone back to me. This is textbook cult behavior. They've found an ideology that makes them feel righteous and superior, and now they're cutting off anyone who doesn't fall in line. Don't use that word. I said quickly, it's not a cult, it's just. Marcus is passionate about justice. He always has been. Passionate about justice doesn't mean cutting off your own mother for asking reasonable questions. Mama, when did Marcus become someone who deals in ultimatums instead of conversations? I didn't have an answer. My son Cameron, the youngest at 43, was blunter. He's being brainwashed by that woman. I never trusted Vanessa. She's one of those people who needs to feel smarter than everyone else, and now she's found a whole ideology that tells her she is. Cameron, no, Ma, listen. I'm going to talk to Marcus. This is ridiculous. Please don't. I don't want to make it worse. But Cameron called his brother anyway. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Cameron told me about it afterward, his voice tight with anger. Marcus said I'm part of the problem too, said I'm capitalist, minded because I own a business that I've bought into the oppressor's framework. Ma, he said our whole family is infected with internalized racism and false consciousness. Those were his exact words, false consciousness. I closed my eyes. That's not Marcus talking, that's the podcast. Exactly. So what are we going to do about it? What could we do? Marcus was a grown man with his own family. You can't force someone to think differently. You can't argue them out of a position they didn't arrive at through argument. But what I didn't know, then what I wouldn't discover for another week, was that things were about to get even worse. The explosion happened at the family reunion. Every year, my sister hosts a big gathering at her property outside Montgomery. It's a tradition going back 40 years. Cousins, aunts, uncles, children, grandchildren, everyone comes. It's the one time a year when the whole family is together, when the old folks tell stories and the young ones run around chasing fireflies, when we remember who we are and where we come from. I wasn't sure Marcus and Vanessa would come, given everything, but 2 days before the reunion, Marcus texted, "We'll be there. The girls are excited to see everyone." My heart leapt. Maybe this was the breakthrough. Maybe surrounded by family, by love, by the warmth of community, whatever wall had been built between us would start to crack. I arrived at my sister's house early Saturday morning to help set up. By noon, the yard was full of people, the air thick with the smell of barbecue and the sound of laughter. I saw Marcus's car pull up around 1 o'clock. I watched him get out, Vanessa beside him, the twins racing ahead toward their cousins. I walked over, my heart pounding. "Marcus, baby, Vanessa, I'm so glad you came." Marcus gave me a stiff hug. Vanessa barely made eye contact. "Girls, come give Grandmommy a hug," I called out. Lily and Rose looked at their mother. Vanessa shook her head slightly. "Actually, me," Vanessa said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet around us. "We've talked to the girls about maintaining boundaries right now. They know Grandmommy loves them, but we're teaching them that love also means accountability." I felt like I'd been punched. Around us, family members were starting to notice the tension, the strange energy. Accountability for what? My sister Dorothy had walked over, her face already showing protective anger. "Me, what's going on?" "Nothing, Aunt Dorothy," Marcus said quickly. "Just some family stuff we're working through. Family stuff that involves telling children they can't hug their grandmother." Dorothy crossed her arms. "That doesn't sound like working through anything. That sounds like punishment, with respect." Vanessa said, her voice cool, "This is between Marcus, me, and me. It's not really a community matter." Dorothy laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Baby girl, this is a Black family reunion. Everything is a community matter. We don't do this individualistic nonsense. Now somebody better explain why me is being treated like this." I could see Marcus's jaw tightening, that stubborn set to his mouth that I recognized from when he was a little boy, and determined not to back down. "Fine," he said, his voice rising. "You want to know? I'll tell everyone. My mother has been feeding my daughters a whitewashed, sanitized version of history that perpetuates the same systems of oppression our ancestors died fighting against. She's been teaching them to be comfortable with incremental change and respectability politics. And when I tried to address it with her, she refused to acknowledge her role in perpetuating harm. The yard had gone completely silent. 3 people, 3 generations, all staring. I felt my face burn, but I kept my voice steady. "Marcus, that's not what happened, and you know it. I tried to have a conversation with you. You're the one who delivered ultimatums and walked away. See?" Vanessa stepped forward, addressing the crowd now. "This is what we're dealing with. No accountability, no willingness to examine her own complicity, just defensiveness and deflection." My cousin James, who's a retired professor of African American Studies, spoke up. "Hold on now. Complicity in what exactly? Me's been an activist, an educator, a community leader her whole life. What are you accusing her of?" Marcus turned to face everyone, and I realized with a sick feeling that this moment had been planned. This was why they'd come. "I'm accusing her of exactly what the Black radical tradition has always warned us about: the talented 10th, the Black bourgeoisie, the accommodationists who think they're uplifting the race while actually serving the interests of white supremacy. My mother represents a generation that was taught to believe in the system, to work within the system, to respect the system, and now she's trying to pass that same consciousness on to my children. That is enough." Dorothy's voice cracked like a whip. "You're going to stand here and disrespect your mother, the woman who raised you alone after your daddy died, the woman who worked 2 jobs to put you through college. You're going to accuse her of serving white supremacy." "I'm speaking truth," Marcus said, but I could hear the tremor in his voice now. "Hard truth, truth that makes people uncomfortable. That's what growth requires: discomfort." I found my voice finally. It came out quieter than I intended, but it carried in the silence. "Marcus, you're right that growth requires discomfort, but what you're doing isn't growth, it's rigidity. You've traded one set of absolutes for another. You found a framework that makes you feel righteous, and now you're using it to judge and condemn everyone who doesn't conform to it, including your own family, including me. You don't get it?" he said, and there was something almost desperate in his voice now. You'll never get it because you're too invested in your own righteousness. You think because you marched in the 70s, because you read the right books, because you voted the right way, you think that makes you immune to criticism, but it doesn't. Your entire world, you is contaminated by false consciousness, and until you're willing to tear it down completely and rebuild from scratch, you're part of the problem. My niece, Sandra, who's a clinical psychologist, stepped forward. Marcus, I need to say something as someone who cares about you. What you're describing, this all, or nothing thinking, this need for ideological purity, this cutting off of relationships with people who question the ideology, these are warning signs. I'm not saying the podcast is a cult, but I am saying that you're exhibiting thought patterns that are concerning. And there it is. Vanessa said triumphantly. The family closes ranks. Instead of listening, instead of engaging with the substance of what Marcus is saying, you attack his mental state. You pathologize his awakening. This is what systems of oppression do. They make the people pointing out the truth seem crazy. I watched this happening, this surreal nightmare unfolding at my family reunion, and something shifted inside me. The hurt began to transform into something else, clarity, cold, hard clarity. This wasn't about history. This wasn't even really about the podcast. This was about power and control. Vanessa had found an ideology that gave her power over my son, and Marcus had found an ideology that allowed him to feel superior to everyone around him, including the mother who had sacrificed everything for him, and they were wielding it like a weapon, using the language of social justice to mask what was really happening. Emotional manipulation and family destruction. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and I saw a man who was lost. Lost in certainty, lost in righteousness, lost in an echo chamber that confirmed his every prejudice and dismissed his every doubt. I love you, Marcus, I said clearly, so everyone could hear. I will always love you, but I will not be bullied into denouncing my own mind, my own experience, my own life's work. I will not tell my granddaughters that everything I've learned and lived means nothing. I will not participate in my own erasure. I turned to address the entire family. I've tried to have conversations. I've listened to the podcast. I've examined my own positions and beliefs. I've been willing to learn and grow, but what's being demanded of me isn't growth. It's submission. Submission to one way of thinking, one interpretation of history, one framework for understanding the world. And I won't do that. I can't do that, because I know what it looks like when people stop asking questions, when they stop tolerating dissent, when they divide the world into the enlightened and the deceived. I've seen it before, and it never ends well. Marcus was shaking his head, his face red. You're twisting everything. You're making me the villain because I'm trying to break generational cycles of trauma and accommodation. No, I interrupted. I'm stating facts. You've cut me off from my granddaughters. You've delivered ultimatums instead of having discussions. You've refused to provide sources or evidence for extraordinary claims. You've dismissed everyone who questions your new world, you as contaminated or complicit. You've created an us versus, the mentality where anyone who doesn't agree with you completely is an enemy. And now you're trying to humiliate me in front of my own family to prove that you're right and I'm wrong. Vanessa grabbed Marcus's arm. We don't have to listen to this. Let's go. But Marcus didn't move. He stood there, staring at me, and for just a moment, I saw my boy again. Confused, hurt, trapped. Then Vanessa tugged harder, and the moment passed. His face hardened. Come on, girls, we're leaving. Lily and Rose looked bewildered, caught between their parents and their extended family. Lily's eyes found mine, and I saw tears starting to form. I wanted to run to her, to scoop her up, to promise her that everything would be okay. But I stood still and gave her a small smile and a nod, trying to communicate without words. It's okay, baby. Grandma's okay, they left. The yard was silent for a long moment. Then the murmuring started, the outrage, the confusion, the anger on my behalf. But I barely heard it. I was too busy realizing something important. I needed to understand what was really happening. Not just with Marcus, not just with this podcast, but with the whole phenomenon. I needed to know what we were really dealing with. And that's when I noticed something that changed everything. It was my nephew, Kevin, who first pointed it out. Kevin's 35, works in tech, spends half his life online. He found me sitting by myself near the edge of the property, looking out over the fields. "Aunt Me, can I show you something?" He sat down beside me with his laptop open. After Marcus left, I started doing some digging on this doctor, Travis Mitchell, who runs the podcast. I wanted to see what his credentials were, where he got his PhD, what his scholarly work looks like. And Kevin's face was grim. There is no Dr. Travis Mitchell, at least not one with any academic credentials. The name is probably fake. A quick search shows there are hundreds of Travis Mitchells, but none of them match the voice or biography mentioned on the podcast. No dissertation, no published research, no university affiliation. My stomach dropped. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I checked every academic database I could access. Nothing. Then I went deeper." He turned the laptop toward me. "Look at this." He showed me a forum discussion, people analyzing the podcast's revenue streams. The podcast had a Patreon with over 15,000 subscribers, each paying between $5 and $50 a month. There were premium episodes, merchandise, exclusive content. Someone had calculated that Dr. Mitchell, whoever he really was pulling in somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000 a month. It's a business, Aunt Me, a very profitable business, and the business model is simple. Tell people that everything they were taught is a lie, that they're special for seeing through the lies, that anyone who questions them is an enemy, and then get them to pay for more content that reinforces these beliefs. I stared at the numbers. Marcus and Vanessa are paying for this. Almost certainly. Look at the Patreon tiers. The top tier, at $50 a month, gets you access to a private community, educational resources, and personal guidance on decolonizing your mind. It's Aunt Me, its classic cult recruitment structure. Create an in-group with special knowledge, isolate members from outside influences, establish the leader as the ultimate authority, make questioning the doctrine equivalent to betrayal. I felt sick. My son, my brilliant son with his master's degree in history, was being taken in by what amounted to a grift. A sophisticated, psychologically manipulative grift that wrapped itself in the language of racial justice, but a grift nonetheless. "There's more," Kevin said quietly. I found testimonials from people who have left the community. They describe the same patterns: initial excitement, gradually cutting off family and friends who don't share the beliefs, financial strain from paying for more and more content, mental health deterioration from the constant state of anger and vigilance the podcast promotes. One woman said she lost custody of her kids because she'd become so radicalized that she was teaching them to distrust all authority, including teachers and doctors. "Oh God, Marcus." The words came out as a whisper. Kevin squeezed my shoulder. "I'm sending you all these links. You need to document everything, not just for Marcus's sake, but for those little girls, if this escalates, and it sounds like it already is. You might need evidence that what's happening isn't about legitimate political differences. It's about manipulation and exploitation." I spent the rest of that evening reading testimonials, watching YouTube videos from people who'd escaped similar situations, learning about thought reform and undue influence. The patterns were all there. Love bombing at the beginning, everything Marcus said about feeling awakened and seen, followed by isolation from non-believers cutting me off, escalating demands for ideological purity, the ultimatums, and increasingly bizarre reality testing, rejecting established historical facts in favor of conspiracy style thinking, and underneath it all, money flowing to a man with no credentials, no accountability, and no qualms about destroying families as long as the Patreon subscriptions kept rolling in. By the time I closed my laptop at midnight, I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, clear, focused, righteous anger. My son was being exploited, my granddaughters were being harmed, and I was going to do something about it. But I knew I couldn't go in guns blazing. Marcus would just see that as confirmation that I was an enemy. I needed to be strategic. I needed to be smart. I needed a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a researcher. I reached out to cult intervention specialists, to family therapists who work with ideological extremism, to experts in online radicalization. I learned about exit counseling, about how to maintain connection with someone who's been drawn into a high-control group, about the importance of patience and non-confrontation. One specialist, Dr. Angela Richardson, spent an hour on the phone with me explaining the psychology at work. The key thing to understand me is that your son doesn't think he's been manipulated. He thinks he's been enlightened. The podcast gave him a framework that makes sense of his anger and frustration about racial injustice, which is legitimate, but channels it in ways that are ultimately destructive. He feels part of something important, something righteous. Challenging that means challenging his entire sense of identity right now. So what do? Just watch him destroy his life. No, you maintain connection however you can. You document concerning behavior not to use against him, but in case legal intervention becomes necessary for the children's welfare, you gather information and you wait for the cracks to show. What cracks? There are always cracks. The ideology can't hold up under sustained contact with reality. Something will happen. A financial strain from paying for all this content, a disagreement within the community, a time when the podcast's predictions don't come true, a moment when Vanessa pushes too hard and Marcus starts to remember who he was before all this. Those are your openings. And then what? Then you ask questions, not challenging questions, curious questions. You make him think through the contradictions himself. You can't argue someone out of this kind of belief system. They have to find their own way out. But you can light the path. I thanked her and hung up, my mind already working. I needed to stay connected to Marcus somehow, but how, when he'd cut me off? The answer came from an unexpected source, my granddaughter Lily. She called me from Vanessa's phone one evening, her little voice careful and quiet. "Grandma, I'm not supposed to call you, but I miss you." My heart broke and mended in the same moment. "Oh, baby, I miss you too, so much. Mommy and Daddy say you need time to learn to think better. But I don't understand what that means. You're the smartest person I know." I closed my eyes, choosing my words carefully. "Sometimes grown-ups disagree about things, sweetheart. Your mommy and daddy believe some things, and I believe some other things, and we're trying to figure out how to talk about it. But that doesn't change how much I love you and your sister. Will you ever be able to babysit us again?" "I hope so, baby. I really hope so." There was a pause. "Then, Daddy seems sad a lot now. He says it's because he's learning hard truths, but it just seems like sad to me." That detail stuck with me long after Lily had to quickly hang up because Vanessa was coming. Marcus was sad. The ideology that was supposed to liberate him was making him miserable. I called my daughter Teresa. "I need you to invite Marcus and Vanessa to dinner. Just you and Frank, them, the girls. Keep it casual. Don't mention me. Just observe and report back." Teresa was hesitant. "Mama, I'm not going to spy on my brother." "I'm not asking you to spy. I'm asking you to maintain family connection and tell me how he's doing. That's not spying. That's loving your brother enough to stay present even when it's hard." She agreed reluctantly. The dinner happened 3 days later. Teresa called me that night, her voice troubled. "Mama, something's wrong. Marcus barely ate. He snapped at the girls over nothing, and Vanessa, she was monitoring everything he said, every time he started to talk about anything personal. Anything from before the podcast, she'd steer the conversation back to what they'd been learning. It was creepy, honestly. Did he seem happy? No, he seemed exhausted. And when I mentioned Cameron's business expansion, Just making conversation. Vanessa went on this 10-minute rant about how small business ownership is just another form of capitalist exploitation and how Cameron is deluded if he thinks he's not an oppressor himself. Marcus just sat there nodding, but he looked trapped, Mama. That's the only word for it. Like he was trapped and didn't know how to get out. That image haunted me, my son, trapped in an ideology that promised freedom but delivered only isolation and misery. The next crack came from an unexpected direction: money. I heard about it through Cameron, who heard about it from a mutual friend who worked at the bank. Marcus and Vanessa had taken out a second mortgage on their house, $25,000, Ma. Cameron told me, his voice tight with worry. The loan officer asked our friend what they needed it for, trying to make conversation, and Vanessa said they were investing in their family's education and consciousness development. $25,000 to a fake doctor running a podcast. My mind reeled. There's more, Cameron continued. Apparently, this isn't the first time. They've been making substantial payments to various online courses, coaching programs, and activist organizations recommended by the podcast. The loan officer said their financial profile has changed dramatically in the last 6 months. Can we do anything, legally, I mean? He's a grown man, Ma. Unless we can prove he's incompetent or being directly defrauded, which is hard when he's voluntarily making these payments, there's not much we can do. I sat with that information for a long time, then I made a decision. I called my lawyer, Patricia Chen. We'd known each other for 20 years, ever since she'd helped me with Robert's estate. I explained the situation, all of it. She listened without interrupting, then said, this is primarily a family matter, not a legal one. But here's what I can do. I can draft a grandparents' rights consultation memo. In Alabama, grandparents can petition for visitation if they're being unreasonably denied access to their grandchildren. I'm not saying you should file. That would escalate things dramatically, but having information, understanding your options might be useful. What would I need to prove? That you have an established relationship with the children, that visitation is in their best interest, and that the parent's decision to cut off contact isn't based on legitimate concerns about children's welfare. Based on what you've told me, you'd have a strong case, especially if we can document that their decision is based on a third party's influence rather than your actual behavior. Document how? Exactly the way you've been doing. Keep records of your attempts to communicate. Save text messages, note dates and times of contact. Keep the research you've done on the podcast and its methods. If Marcus or Vanessa make statements about their reasons for cutting you off, document those too. You're building a record that shows you're a loving, concerned grandmother being excluded for reasons that have nothing to do with the children's safety or well-being. I thanked her and hung up. Idea of taking legal action against my own son made me feel ill. But the idea of losing my granddaughters, of watching them be raised in an environment of ideological extremism and isolation. Well, worse, I prayed that night for the first time in months, not for victory, not for vindication, just for wisdom, for patience, for the strength to do what was right even when it was hard, and for my son to find his way home. The answer to that prayer came in a form I never expected. It was 3 weeks after the family reunion, on a Wednesday morning. I was in my kitchen making tea when my phone rang. Marcus, my hand shook as I answered. Hello, Mom. His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. Mom, Can I come over? Of course, baby. When? Now. I'm parked outside your house. I opened the front door to find my son sitting in his car, his head down on the steering wheel. I walked out, opened the passenger door, and got in beside him. We sat there in silence for a long moment. Then Marcus started to talk. She wants to pull the girls out of school. Vanessa, she says the public school system is a tool of indoctrination, that the teachers are agents of white supremacy. She wants to homeschool them using curriculum from the podcast network, special courses that cost $200 a month per child. I stayed quiet, letting him continue, and I was going to agree. I almost did agree. But then Rose asked me why she couldn't see her grandmother anymore, and I gave her the answer we'd practiced about boundaries and accountability and protecting her from harmful narratives. And she looked at me with these big confused eyes and said, "But Daddy, Grandmommy never hurt me. She just loves me." His voice broke and I realized I couldn't explain it to her in a way that made sense, because it doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. I reached over and took his hand. He gripped it like a drowning man gripping a lifeline. "I'm tired, Mom. I'm so tired. I'm tired of being angry all the time. I'm tired of seeing enemies everywhere. I'm tired of Vanessa monitoring everything I say and do, correcting me when I don't use the right language, quizzing me on podcast episodes to make sure I'm staying committed to the work. I'm tired of feeling like I can never do enough, learn enough, be pure enough. Baby, you don't have to. I mortgaged our house, Mom. $25,000. Vanessa said it was necessary, that you can't put a price on consciousness, that we had to invest in our own liberation. And I went along with it because I was afraid that if I questioned it, she'd say I was backsliding, that I was showing signs of false consciousness. He turned to look at me, his eyes red. "When did I become someone who's afraid to question things? You raised me to question everything, to think critically, to examine evidence. When did I lose that? This was the moment, Doctor. Richardson had told me about the crack, the opening. I chose my words carefully. You didn't lose it, Marcus. It's still there. You're using it right now. You're questioning, you're examining, you're thinking. But Vanessa's going to be so angry. She's going to say, I'm betraying everything we've worked toward, that I'm letting you manipulate me. Marcus, listen to me. I need you to hear this. Loving your wife doesn't mean surrendering your own mind. Supporting your partner doesn't mean agreeing with everything she says. And wanting justice, wanting to understand history, wanting to fight against racism. None of those good desires require you to cut off your family, spend money you don't have, or accept everything one person says without evidence. But what if she's right? What if I am backsliding? What if I'm just being weak and comfortable? I squeezed his hand. Let me ask you some questions. Just think about them, okay? He nodded. Has this podcast made your life better or worse? Has it brought you closer to your family or pushed you away? Has it made you more peaceful or more anxious? Has it expanded your understanding or narrowed it to one perspective? Has it encouraged you to ask questions or to accept one authority's word as absolute truth? Marcus sat with those questions. I watched the internal struggle play across his face. Finally, he whispered, worse. More anxious, more narrow, less questioning. And that doesn't worry you, it terrifies me. But Vanessa says that terror is part of the process, that it means I'm finally confronting hard truths. Or, I said gently, it means something is genuinely wrong. Baby, I've done a lot of research over the last few weeks. I've talked to people who study extremism, who work with families dealing with situations like this. And I've learned that legitimate education, legitimate social justice work, it doesn't require you to abandon your family. It doesn't demand financial sacrifice you can't afford. It doesn't isolate you from everyone who knew you before. It doesn't make you fearful of asking questions. He was crying now, tears running down his face. I don't know how to get out. I don't know how to tell Vanessa. She's going to. Mom, she's going to make this so hard. I know, baby. I know, but you're not alone. Your family is here. I'm here. We'll figure this out together. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I said at the reunion, for cutting you off, for keeping the girls away. Stop. We'll have time for all that later. Right now, we need to focus on what comes next. He wiped his eyes. What comes next? First, you need to talk to Vanessa. You need to tell her that you're taking a step back from the podcast, that you need some space to think. You're not attacking her. You're not saying she's wrong. You're just saying you need to process some things on your own. She won't accept that. Then that tells you something important about the relationship. Marcus, a healthy partner supports your need to think for yourself. An unhealthy partner punishes you for it. He nodded slowly. Okay. Okay, I'll try. Second, I want you to call Dr. Angela Richardson. She's a therapist who specializes in helping people process experiences with high-control groups and extremist ideologies. Just talk to her, see if what she says resonates. Do you think I'm in a cult? I met his eyes. I think you got caught up in something that uses sophisticated psychological manipulation to make good people believe they're doing righteous work, while actually harming themselves and others. What you want to call that is up to you. He absorbed that. Then, can I see the girls? Can they come inside and see you? My heart leaped. Are they in the car? No, Vanessa took them to her sister's, but, Mom, can we do Sunday dinner again? This week? Like we used to. Yes, I breathed. Yes, baby. Of course. He hugged me then, really hugged me, and I held my son and cried into his shoulder and thanked God for cracks, for questions, for the human spirit's resilient need for truth and connection. But I knew this wasn't over. The hardest part was still coming. Marcus went home that afternoon to talk to Vanessa. He called me 3 hours later, his voice shaking. She's furious. She's saying I'm being manipulated, that you got your hooks back into me, that I'm throwing away everything we've built together. She's threatening to take the girls to her mother's in Atlanta, to separate for a while so I can figure out what I really want. My blood went cold. Marcus, you can't let her take those children. Out of state right now, not while things are this unstable. What am I supposed to do? Force her to stay? I took a breath. This was the moment I'd been preparing for, hoping I'd never have to use. Marcus, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I love Vanessa. She's your wife, the mother of your children, and I want things to work out. But right now, she's not thinking clearly. And neither were you until a few hours ago. Those girls need stability. They need both their parents present and functioning. If Vanessa takes them to Atlanta, you need to file for emergency custody. Mom, I can't. Yes, you can. And I'm going to help you. I've already consulted with a lawyer. We have documentation of the financial decisions, the isolation tactics, the ideological extremism. A judge will see that the children's welfare is at risk. This will destroy my marriage. Marcus, your marriage is already in crisis. The question is whether you're going to let it destroy your children too. Silence, then I need to think. Think fast, baby. Because if she's serious about leaving, you have a very small window to act. He hung up. I sat in my living room, my phone clutched in my hand, and prayed that my son would find the courage to do what needed to be done. The call came at 2 a.m. Vanessa had packed bags for herself and the girls. She was planning to leave at dawn. Marcus met her at the door as she was loading the car. He took the girls' bags out of the trunk. You're not taking them, he said quietly. Not like this. Not in anger. Not to use them as weapons against me. According to Marcus, Vanessa exploded. She screamed that he was kidnapping his own children, that she'd call the police, that he'd regret this for the rest of his life. Then call them, and Marcus said, let's have the police come. Let's have a conversation about why you're trying to flee across state lines with our children, because your husband asked some questions about a podcast. She didn't call. She got in her car and, left alone, Marcus called me, his voice numb. The girls are still asleep. They don't know. Mom, what have I done? You protected your children. You chose them over ideology. You chose truth over comfortable lies. You did the right thing, even though it was the hardest thing. What if I'm wrong? What if I just destroyed my family for nothing? You didn't destroy your family, baby. You're trying to save it. The sun rose on a new reality. Marcus and the girls at his house, Vanessa at a hotel, refusing to answer his calls, me on my way over with breakfast and steady presence, and a plan starting to form for what came next. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of lawyers, therapists, and difficult conversations. Marcus filed for emergency temporary custody, citing Vanessa's attempt to remove the children from the state during a time of marital crisis. The judge granted it, but ordered family therapy for everyone. That's how we ended up in Dr. Angela Richardson's office. Me, Marcus, Vanessa, and Dr. Richardson herself. Vanessa came in with her armor on, her face set in hard lines. She refused to look at me, but Dr. Richardson didn't start with accusations or confrontations. She started with questions. Vanessa, tell me about what drew you to the podcast initially. And Vanessa talked. She talked about feeling dismissed in professional spaces as a black woman, about the rage she felt watching injustice after injustice, about the frustration of white colleagues who claimed to be allies but never did the work. All legitimate feelings, all real pain. And the podcast made sense of that pain. Dr. Richardson asked gently. It did more than make sense of it. It gave me a framework for understanding that the pain was systematic, intentional, ongoing. It showed me I wasn't crazy for being angry. You're absolutely not crazy for being angry. Anger at injustice is appropriate, healthy even. But tell me, did the podcast also give you tools for channeling that anger productively? For building instead of just tearing down? For connecting with others instead of isolating? Vanessa's face flickered with uncertainty. It connected me with a community of people who understood. A community that required payment to access. Activism costs money. Content creators deserve compensation. Absolutely they do. But tell me about the amount you and Marcus have spent in the last 6 months. Walk me through those decisions. As Vanessa detailed the payments, Patreon subscriptions, course fees, coaching sessions, special content, recommended books and materials, I watched Marcus's face. He was hearing it all laid out for the first time. His eyes widened when the total exceeded $40,000. And this felt sustainable to you financially. Dr. Richardson asked. For the first time, Vanessa hesitated. We were investing in something important. More important than your daughter's college fund, which I understand was depleted. Vanessa's face flushed. You're making it sound exploitative. It wasn't. We were willing participants. I'm not questioning your willingness. I'm questioning whether you were fully informed. Did Dr. Mitchell disclose that he has no verifiable credentials? That his identity can't be confirmed? That his claims aren't supported by mainstream historical scholarship? Mainstream scholarship is part of the problem. Perhaps. But surely you'd want to verify extraordinary claims with some kind of evidence beyond one person's word. You're both educated people. Marcus is a history teacher. Didn't it seem odd that this supposedly revolutionary historical information came with no sources, no citations, no way to check the methodology? Vanessa's face was crumbling now. I could see the moment when the certainty began to crack, when questions started seeping in through the wall of ideology. But he was saying things that felt true, things that matched my experience. I believe that, Dr. Richardson said softly. Effective manipulation always contains a kernel of truth. That's what makes it so powerful. The podcast took your legitimate anger and experiences, validated them, which is good, but then channeled them in ways that isolated you from your support system, drained your finances, and created us versus them mentality that fractured your family. That's where it stopped being education and started being exploitation. Vanessa looked at Marcus for the first time since entering the room. You think I've been manipulated? Marcus's voice was gentle. I think we both were. I think we wanted so badly to be on the right side, to be enlightened, to be doing something meaningful. We were vulnerable. And someone took advantage of that vulnerability. But I didn't mean. I never wanted to hurt me. I just wanted, you wanted to be right. I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken. You wanted to feel like you understood something others didn't. You wanted to be special and righteous. I understand that, Vanessa. We all want those things. But when that desire makes us hurt people who love us, when it makes us spend money we don't have, when it makes us afraid to ask questions, that's when we need to step back and examine what's really happening. Vanessa was crying now, real tears, not angry ones. I've been so awful to you. The things I said at the reunion. We're coming from a place of pain and confusion. I know that. I've never stopped knowing that. Dr. Richardson leaned forward. Here's what I want both of you to understand. What you experienced wasn't unique. There are dozens, hundreds of people going through the same thing with this podcast and others like it. They use sophisticated psychological techniques, love bombing, isolation, us versus, them thinking, financial exploitation, thought, stopping, demand for purity. These are textbook methods of undue influence. Are you saying it's a cult? Marcus asked. I'm saying it exhibits many characteristics of what we call a high-control group. Whether you use the word cult or not is less important than recognizing the patterns and the harm. We spent 2 more hours in that office. Slowly, painfully, Vanessa began to see what had happened. She talked about how the podcast community had made her feel special at first, but then increasingly inadequate. There was always more to learn, more content to buy, more work to do to prove you were really committed. She described how questioning anything would result in other community members accusing you of backsliding, of showing internalized racism, of not being ready for the truth. It was exhausting, she finally admitted. I've been exhausted for months. But I thought that was just part of the process, part of growth. Growth shouldn't make you exhausted and isolated. Dr. Richardson said it should make you more connected, more grounded, more peaceful. What you're describing is trauma, not growth. By the end of the session, Vanessa agreed to stop listening to the podcast, to stop participating in the online community, and to begin individual therapy to process what had happened. Marcus agreed to the same, and I agreed to give them space to work on their marriage while maintaining consistent, healthy access to my granddaughters. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't even a complete one, but it was a beginning. The aftermath took months to fully unfold. Vanessa moved back home after 2 weeks in the hotel, but things were fragile. Between her and Marcus, they went to marriage counseling twice a week. She started individual therapy to address the underlying pain and anger that had made her vulnerable to manipulation. In the first place, the financial damage was significant. The second mortgage would take years to pay off. The college fund was depleted. But Marcus picked up summer school teaching to help, and they started rebuilding, slowly and carefully. Vanessa called me one evening, about 6 weeks after that family therapy session. Her voice was small, ashamed. I need to apologize. Really apologize, not the kind I gave in Dr. Richardson's office. What I did to you, trying to turn Marcus against you, keeping the girls away, saying those things at the reunion. There's no excuse for it. I was so certain I was right, so sure I was protecting my family from harmful influence, but I was the harmful influence. I nearly destroyed everything. You were being manipulated, honey. I said gently. Manipulated people do things they wouldn't normally do. That's what Dr. Richardson says, but I'm still responsible for my choices. I chose to believe someone without evidence. I chose to cut you off without real cause. I chose to prioritize ideology over relationship. Those were my choices, and I'm sorry for them. I forgive you, Vanessa. I forgave you a long time ago. How? How could you forgive me when I haven't even forgiven myself? Because I understand how it happened. Because I love my son and my granddaughters, and you're part of that family. And because holding on to anger would only hurt me, not you. She cried. I let her. Sometimes crying is the only way to start healing. The girls came back into my life gradually. At first, just short, supervised visits while Marcus was present, then longer visits, then overnight stays, and finally, the return of Thursday afternoon tea and braiding sessions. The first time Rose climbed into my lap and asked me to tell her a story about when I was a little girl, I cried. Happy tears, grateful tears, relieved tears. Why are you crying, Grandma? Lily asked, concerned. Because I missed you so much, baby, and I'm just so happy to be here with you again. We're not going away again, Rose said seriously. Mommy promised. She said she was confused for a while, but she's not confused anymore. Out of the mouths of babes, Marcus did something I never expected. He created his own podcast, not to compete with Dr. Mitchell, not to spread his own ideology, but to tell the truth about what had happened to him, to warn other educators and families about the dangers of ideological extremism masquerading as social justice. He called it Questions and Evidence, a teacher's journey back to critical thinking. In his first episode, he talked about how he'd almost lost everything: his mother, his family, his financial security, his own mind. Chasing after the feeling of being enlightened, being special, being on the right side. "I'm a history teacher," he said into the microphone. "I was trained to examine sources, to look for bias, to consider multiple perspectives, to base conclusions on evidence. But I abandoned all of that because someone told me that doing those things was actually a trap set by the oppressor. I stopped thinking critically because I was told critical thinking itself was contaminated." If you're listening to this and you're caught up in something similar, whether it's this particular podcast or any other ideology that requires you to cut off your family, spend money you don't have, and stop asking questions, I want you to hear this. It's not too late. You can come back. Your family is waiting. The truth is waiting. Your own mind is waiting. Start asking questions again. Ask for sources. Ask for evidence. Ask if the ideology is making your life better or worse. Ask if it's bringing you closer to people or pushing you away. Ask if you're allowed to disagree without being labeled a traitor, and if asking those questions gets you attacked, dismissed, or cast out. That tells you everything you need to know. His podcast grew slowly but steadily. He got messages from other people who'd been through similar experiences, from families torn apart by ideological extremism, from educators worried about students being radicalized online. One message came from a woman in Ohio whose sister had stopped speaking to their entire family after getting involved with the same podcast that had captured Marcus. She'd mortgaged her house, quit her job to focus on consciousness work, and cut off everyone who questioned her choices. Marcus talked to the woman for hours, sharing his story, offering hope that recovery was possible, suggesting resources for families dealing with undue influence. That's when I knew he'd really come back to himself. My son was teaching again, helping again, using his mind and his compassion to serve others. The darkness hadn't destroyed him. It had refined him. As for Dr. Travis Mitchell and his podcast Marcus filed complaints with Patreon for fraud and misrepresentation. Others who'd been harmed did the same. The platform eventually removed him, though he quickly popped up elsewhere under a different name with a similar grift. But the community he'd built began to fracture once people started asking questions, once they began to examine what they'd been taught with actual critical thinking. The spell, once broken, couldn't be easily recast. A year after that terrible family reunion, we had another one. Same place, same people, but everything was different. Marcus stood up before dinner and asked for everyone's attention. Vanessa stood beside him, her hand in his. "I need to say something to all of you." He began. "Last year at this reunion, I stood here and accused my mother of terrible things. I questioned her commitment to justice, her understanding of history, her love for her grandchildren. I did it publicly, deliberately, to humiliate her and to prove that I was more enlightened than the rest of you. I was wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. And Mom, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, for the months I kept your granddaughters away from you, for the things I said. You deserved better from me." He turned to address everyone else. "I was caught up in something I didn't fully understand. I thought I was being educated, but I was actually being indoctrinated. I thought I was being brave, but I was actually being manipulated. And I almost lost everything that mattered because I stopped thinking for myself. So I want to thank everyone who stayed present even when I pushed you away, who kept the door open even when I slammed it shut, who loved me even when I was being unlovable. Family means staying connected even when it's hard. You all taught me that. There wasn't a dry eye in the yard. I stood up and walked over to my son. I took his face in my hands the way I used to when he was little. You came back. I said simply, "That's what matters, you came back." We hugged, and the family erupted in applause and tears, and the kind of joy that only comes after deep pain has been healed. That night, sitting on my sister's porch with the fireflies dancing and the sound of children laughing in the background, I reflected on everything I'd learned. I learned that love sometimes means standing firm instead of giving in, that protecting your own peace and boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary, that you can't argue someone out of a belief system that wasn't built on argument, that patience, documentation, and strategic thinking matter more than emotional reactions. I learned that manipulation doesn't always look like a villain twirling a mustache. Sometimes it looks like social justice. Sometimes it wears the mask of enlightenment and righteousness. Sometimes it uses your own values and pain against you. I learned that even good people, smart people, educated people can be drawn into harmful ideologies when those ideologies offer something they desperately want: certainty, purpose, belonging, righteousness. And I learned that the way out isn't through confrontation or force. It's through questions, through maintaining connection, through being a steady presence that reminds people who they were before the ideology took hold. If you're going through something similar, if someone you love has been caught up in an extremist ideology, whether political, religious, or something else, I want you to know a few things. First, it's not your fault. You didn't cause this, and you can't fix it by yourself. Second, stay connected however you can. Even if it's just a text message once a week, even if it's just showing up and being present without arguing. You're a lifeline back to reality, and they need you even if they don't know it yet. Third, document everything, not to use as a weapon, but because you might need it to protect children, finances, or your own well-being. Fourth, don't give up hope. People can come back. It takes time and the path isn't linear, but recovery is possible. And finally, take care of yourself. You can't help anyone else if you're destroyed in the process. Get support, set boundaries, and know that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own peace and dignity. My granddaughters are 8 now. They still come over every Thursday for tea and braiding. We talk about everything: history, justice, family, hard topics, and easy ones. But I make sure they understand one thing above all: thinking for yourself isn't a betrayal of justice. It's the foundation of it. Question everything, even things that sound righteous, especially things that sound righteous. Because truth can stand up to questions, lies can't. Marcus is still teaching, still doing his podcast, still helping families navigate these complex situations. Vanessa is thriving in therapy, and she's actually become an advocate for educating people about online manipulation and undue influence. And me, I'm still here, still learning, still growing. Still me, with my tea and my stories and my family gathered around me. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've been through something similar or know someone who has, I'd love to hear about your experiences. We heal in community by sharing our stories and learning from each other. Remember, every story has a lesson, and yours might be just beginning. Keep asking questions, keep thinking critically, keep loving fiercely but wisely. And know that the truth, the real truth, built on evidence and nuance and hard, won wisdom, will always be there waiting when you're ready to see it. This is me, reminding you that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stays, who fights for connection, and who loves you enough to tell you the truth even when it's hard to hear. Be well, be wise, and keep thinking for yourself.